Hello and welcome to Tag1 Team Talks, the blog and podcast of Tag1 Consulting. We're commemorating the 20th anniversary of Drupal with an interview series featuring community leaders talking about their Drupal experience. I'm really excited to have Greg Dunlap on the show today. Greg is a director of strategy at Lullabot, which is one of the most well-known Drupal agencies, and he's been a prolific and important contributor to Drupal over the last 15 years. I'm Meyers, managing director of Tag1. Tag1 is the #2 all-time contributor to Drupal. We build large-scale applications for Fortune 500s, large organizations in every sector using Drupal, as well as many other technologies. Dries, the founder of Drupal, once said that it's really the Drupal community and not so much the software that makes the Drupal project what it is. And so our goal with this podcast series is to introduce you to some of the amazing community members that have made Drupal what it is. And in sharing their stories and seeing their success as a result of their engagement in Drupal communities, we really hope that it will inspire you to get more engaged in open source communities as well. So please welcome Greg Dunlap to the show. Greg, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Greg, so you've been programming for 30 years now?
Yeah, yes. I first wrote BASIC on a K-Pro computer in high school. That was probably like 1984 or something like that.
I remember when we were kids. But yeah, you have this amazing background. You've worked in C++ on real-time operating systems, building out slot machines, writing assembly to design coin-op games, including pinball machines. I mean, you've worked with pretty much every web technology and platform out there, from Microsoft and Oracle stuff to the major open source platforms, and of course, you've worked with several well-known Drupal agencies, Palantir, Node1, before joining Lullabot. And you've helped organize, speak at numerous Drupal camps, Drupalcons. You served as the Drupal Initiative lead for configuration management, the CMI Initiative, and I want to come back to that because there's a lot I want to talk about on that front if we have time. And of course, you maintain deploy and services modules and have contributed to core. So there's a lot to talk about today. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, me too. It's been quite a ride.
Yeah. Before we jump into the Drupal stuff, though, I kind of wanted to step back and talk about your career prior to Drupal. A bit of a what is the origin story of Greg? And when I was doing some reading preparing for today's show, I noticed that you have a degree in photojournalism and fine art photography. And so I wanted to start there because I love really interesting career paths, and I see this a lot with talented and successful people, is that they've done a really wide array of things. And so I really got to know, how did you go from film and photography into technology?
It was kind of a confluence of different things. Like, I had been interested, like I said, in programming for a long time, but like when I was in college, I was kind of like a rebellious punk rock kid. And at the time, we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s, going into technology or computer stuff, it basically meant working in the basement at an insurance company or a bank, and it didn't interest me. It's just like, I was good at programming and I enjoyed programming, but the jobs that were out there for me just didn't seem like anything I actually wanted to do. And I really loved photography and journalism, and my mom was a journalism major as well. And I got very inspired by, seeing, All the President's Men and reading about Edward R. Murrow and stuff. And so I started digging into that. And one of the things that I realized as I was getting towards the end of my schooling is that I could kind of see the end of the newspaper industry happening even way back then. I graduated in 1991, and I could see the beginnings of it starting already. And I found that really sad. And also, when I graduated, there was a very bad recession going on. So I found it very hard to find a job. And so the first job I got out of college was at a real estate weekly, like the kind of things they would give out in supermarkets, listing houses for sales and stuff like that. And while I was there, there was a guy who was kind of crazy, who was my boss, who owned the place. And he had a database application that he had built in Paradox for DOS, for those of us who are of a certain age and can remember that. And he was documenting basically the street address of every unit in Chicago. And he wanted to convert it to the new Windows version of Paradox, but he was sick of maintaining it. And he's like, oh, you seem to be good with computers. How would you like to do this? And I'm like, sure, I'll give it a shot. And that was my first time really working with relational databases and programming professionally. And from there, I became very proficient at Paradox, and that led me to another job at an agency in Chicago that specialized in Borland products. And that was really the beginning of my career in technology. And that was right around then, the time that the internet came out, which completely blew my mind. Like, I remember I had a friend who worked at one of the first ISPs in Chicago, Ripco. His name is Rob Wormowski. He sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but he brought me in and he said, hey, there's something here you've got to see. And he showed me the very, very first version of Mosaic, and it was absolutely life-changing for me. And so then I started getting into internet stuff, and the rest is kind of history.
Before we get into the internet stuff, how did you end up building, slot machines and particularly pinball games in assembly? Like, was that as cool as it sounds? I mean,
so the way that worked is that I eventually started getting into pinball as a player, and I was really enjoying it. And there was a bar across the street from the real estate place that had a couple of games. And I was dating a girl who introduced me to Usenet, basically. And on Usenet, there was a rec.games.pinball group. And I started reading that and interacting with other pinball players and getting more and more into pinball. And then there was pinball. Chicago is the place where all pinball manufacturing has and continues to happen for all of history, basically. And the Pinball World Championships were being held there in 1994. And so I went, and when I was there, I met a ton of people from all over the country who were mad pinball fans. It was my first competitive pinball experience. I met people who worked at the pinball manufacturers. Many of those people are still dear friends of mine to this day. And that kind of set me on this course of being kind of obsessed with pinball and competitive pinball. And through that, I, met more and more people who worked at the manufacturers, Williams Electronics Games. And the guy, one of the first people I met was a guy named Larry DeMar, who has a long and storied history in the industry. He was the person who programmed Defender and Robotron. So I had a really crappy job. I'm like 4 jobs in now, and I had a really crappy job. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, are you all hiring anyone over at Williams? And he said, well, we're not hiring in pinball because pinball is kind of in a rut right now, but we're hiring people to do slot machines if you're interested in doing that. And I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. And I came to work there. And it was my first experience doing any low-level programming. That was all C++. And it was the greatest job I've ever had. I was on the same floor with all of the pinball people. And so I got to interact with and meet and, hang around with and be a part of that energy, but also work on slot machines, which is a really fascinating industry. I'm not sure I would do it now. But at the time I found really interesting, and it was new technology, and I was young, and it was super cool. The coolest thing is there's nothing like creating something and putting it out there for people to enjoy, and then being able to go out and watch them use it. Like, that experience it's like second to none. It's absolutely amazing.
I think that's one of the things that I struggle with what we do now. I absolutely love it, but there is no physical, tangible product. You can't do that. You can't go out. I mean, you could look at someone, use your website.
Right.
It's not the same thing. And while it is very satisfying, I totally get that, that sense. I mean, it's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was out of that, like, when that company shut down, then one of the pinball designers created his own company to build pinball machines. And then I went to work for him, and that was where I got to, build pinball, and I learned to write assembly, which was really, really crazy and daunting for somebody like, I have no background in computer science. And so to figure out how assembly works was kind of insane. But that was all, it was the same thing. Like I was working on Pinball. Those games are still out there today, and people still tell me how much fun they have with them. And it's really cool.
That's amazing. Is the game behind you? Is that one that you did, or is that just a favorite?
No, actually, this is a favorite. This is the game that got me into pinball. It's called Twilight Zone. It was programmed by Larry DeMar, who I told you about earlier, who was one of the first video game guys and then has a long storied career in pinball, and also designed by Pat Lawler, who was the guy I ended up going to work for in the pinball industry to build pinball machines. So holds a special place in my heart.
Definitely. Do you, hearing you talk about your career, you'd never done C++, and someone's like, hey, go do it. You've never done assembly, go build slot machines. Like, do you think that kind of stuff still happens today? Or like, is it much harder, to get into new technology, or is that just how it happens? You just jump in?
I think it really depends on, I think it really depends on who you're going to work for. Like in both of these cases, I was lucky enough to have met people who were really hiring for enthusiasm and passion and trusting that you would learn it because you wanted to very desperately. And that is exactly what happened. And I don't know how much of that there is today. I mean, I'll also say that, when you look at the complexity of the things we're working with today, like a pinball machine, you can say it's complex to work with assembly and optimizing and all of that stuff. It's true. But at the end of the day, you cannot write more code than fit in 16K of RAM or whatever. It's like you were limited in what you could possibly do. And I think if you look at similar creative industries today, like the video game industry or even the pinball industry now, the complexity of the code bases, of the tool chains, of the things of the different moving parts is like so far beyond what it was when I was working on those things. And I think that is a much bigger limitation, because it's in the web world is exactly the same way. Like it's not enough to just know PHP anymore. It's like you have to know PHP and then CSS and JavaScript now. And then there's all this tooling. You have to learn Composer. You've got to learn, your preprocessors and all of that stuff. It's just like, it's so daunting. And I honestly think that that's a much bigger problem than knowing or not knowing any individual technology.
I long for the days of Mosaic and animated, remember like rollovers were like, whoa.
Oh yeah.
You could just,
the first Drupal, I downloaded it. I changed some things in a config file and I was done. Like, it's just not like that anymore. And I know that there's good reasons why that is, but I also really miss the simplicity and approachability of those days.
Definitely. So fast forwarding a little bit, you ended up at the Seattle Times.
Yeah.
Was there any photojournalism tie in there? How did you end up at the Times?
I was just in Seattle. I was freelancing. I hated freelancing. And I was applying for jobs and they called me. I thought it was really interesting. Like, I did think it would be like kind of a full circle thing of bringing my journalism background back to the work that I was already doing in technology. And it was something that I was really passionate about improving. So, I did that for a while.
Was that your first foray into Drupal?
It was.
What do you recall? Do you remember like what your first impression of Drupal was?
It was interesting because I, at the time, had never really worked with a content management system platform of any kind before. I had written simple content management systems. And I had worked on the one at the Seattle Times that they had written for themselves, because, this was back in a time when writing your own content management system was actually a thing that lots and lots of people did. When they were wanting, they had a site, it was called nwsource.com. And it was basically a conglomeration of like 8 content management systems all thrown together in different times and places, and then brought together to build this site. And they wanted to consolidate into one technology. And so we were looking at different platforms, and the guy who I was working with, his name was Gary Love, on bringing this together, he was very insistent that he wanted something. It didn't have to be open source, but it had to be source code available, like something that we could build and modify on our own without having to rely on outside vendors. And he had some experience with Drupal and knew a lot more about those platforms than I did. And so that's what we ended up with. And yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, that organizations, that's sort of like the story, even today, people moving off of proprietary systems. It fascinates me how sort of like the song remains the same. Motivations for moving to Drupal in many ways haven't changed too much in 20 years, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's the same fights too. Like I remember at the time, one of the biggest reasons why the management at the Times didn't want to go with Drupal is because they didn't have a group of white guys in suits come in and sell it to them and then sign a contract that said that they could sue them if it went wrong. It's like, and that's exactly the same thing that happens today. It's like, from that perspective, like nothing has changed at all.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your Drupal journey and experiences. Do you remember your first contribution to Drupal? And if so, what do you recall about it?
I do. So when we were starting at the Seattle Times, we hired Lullabot to come in and be our consultants. At the time, Lullabot was like 5 people, and they were going to basically we had a call every week with them, and we'd say, hey, we're working on this and we have this problem, how do we deal with this? And then they bring someone together to work with us. And then at the end, when our site was fairly well built, they came in and did training. Matt Westgate and Jeff Eaton came in and did training, and I met Eaton and we immediately hit it off really well. And I was talking to him about a core bug I had found. I meant to go look this up before this and I forgot, but it was something about, it had something to do with databases and I feel like case sensitivity or something. It was a problem that was really weird. I'll have to go look it up. Anyways, he encouraged me to contribute a core patch. And so I did. I made an issue and I made a core patch. And like many people's first core patches, it ended up in the queue being discussed and iterated on for many years before it was finally fixed like 6 years later. But that was my first Drupal contribution.
6 years later.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Wow. I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Yeah.
So we've had some core initiative maintainers on the show before, but we've never really talked about what a core initiative is, how you get anointed as the leader of a core initiative, and what I'm really curious about is, what does a core initiative owner do, and what was it like from your perspective?
Yeah, I should point out that it's been 10 years since I had my core initiative at this point or something like that. And so I think that a lot of how core initiatives are managed has changed in that time. But at the time, so I was the first ever core initiative lead who was named, and Dries had this vision of the core initiatives as, being things that were big pain points in Drupal that he wanted to focus resources and attention to in order to get them moving. At the time, I think for Drupal 8, I had an initiative. Gabor was running a multilingual initiative. Earl and Tim Plunkett were running a Views and Core initiative. There was a front end initiative of some point that ended up falling apart in the middle, if I recall correctly. But those were the big ones. And I think Dries always had a vision of the initiatives leads being as much project managers as architects or software people. And I was not a big core contributor at the time. I had done some documentation patches and some minor things, but I was not well known as a core person in the Drupal community. And at Drupalcon Chicago, I submitted a talk about deployment to the brand new core conversations track. And I gave the very first core conversation, and I literally, before I went in, I thought I was going to puke. I was so nervous. But I went in and gave this talk, and afterwards Dries came up to me and he shook my hand and he said, "That was so great. That's exactly what I envisioned these being." And it was later in the week that he asked me to run the core initiative.
It sounds like going back to enthusiasm and passion and, a willing to, invest in it. And that's like the number one thing I look for, when we're looking to hire new people. That matters to me more than anything, because if if you're not engaged. But I think that's a really amazing story, for people who are listening, to see that you can bring a really great idea to the table. And even if you aren't already this really well-known core initiative owner or whatever it happens to be, there's still a lot of opportunity to be part of, that was a significant change in Drupal that led to a lot of capabilities that were, sorely lacking. So it was a big leap forward for Drupal.
And it was really like, it was hard for me. I think at the time, the Drupal community had a hard time accepting somebody being a big contributor, being a big part of a core initiative, who was not a technical or programmery core contributor. And, I definitely faced some battles on that front. But on the other hand, it was also, to this day, configuration management is such a big deal in Drupal. And, I ran that initiative for 2 years before handing it over to Alex Pott. And, to see it run basically in the same vision that we had envisioned from the beginning is actually pretty crazy. And it's still like, I still feel really good about that part.
Very rewarding. I was talking to a former core initiative owner this morning on another topic and call. But we had some time at the end, and I knew we were talking today, so I asked him a little bit about it. And it sounds like a gargantuan task. It seemed like it took an unbelievable amount of passion and dedication, and cat herding, and to get things to move forward. Like you said, your sort of 6-year core patch experience, now take that to a critical change to the platform, and guess what happens?
And it wasn't done without help. I think in particular, I would call out David Strauss was a very big help in making that happen. He was an incredible technical sounding board, and he was a great supporter of the project, both, from the perspective of developing the architecture, and also Pantheon supported me financially for a while to be able to devote some time to working on CMI, and also to Angie Byron, who was, not just a dear friend, but somebody who I could lean to for support when things were tough. Having those people around to be a part of it were really, really what made it work.
Yeah, amazing folks that have such great insight and capabilities. So what do you think the best part of being part of the Drupal community is?
Well, I made amazing friendships that, persevere to this day and will continue to persevere into time out of the Drupal community, and met amazing people. I got to travel the world. Because of my experiences in Drupal, I got to live overseas for a while and work in Stockholm, Sweden for Node 1. And that was an experience that I will never, ever forget. That was literally completely life-changing. And so, like, all of those things have been really great, but it's also been interesting, just like it really spurred an interest in me and how communities work and how communities work together, and about how open source can kind of, work in different models and stuff like that. Like it really opened up like all of these different areas of interest for me, which have been really fantastic too. Like there's a lot that I have taken away from the community that has really impacted me in, really profound ways, if I'm honest.
Oh, for sure. I think a lot of people have similar experiences. Like it's really,
Mhm.
transformed a lot of aspects of our lives and had, a lifelong impact, whether it's the people we met to, the experiences that afforded us. I think that's one of the things, about Drupal, of the other technologies that I'm part of and communities I interact with, there's always been something different and special about Drupal.
Mhm.
Not that these other communities aren't great, but Drupal definitely stands apart, and that's a big reason why we're doing this series.
Sure.
I always kind of wish that a documentarian, would bring in like a sociologist and do like a, this is Drupal movie.
It's interesting. I was recently going through the Lullabot website, and I was I started going through the archives of the Lullabot podcast, and it was so fascinating because it's like that Lullabot podcast is like, it's like the history of Drupal in recorded right there on these bits, because that thing is 10 years old. And I've been really wanting to do something to really highlight that, and it's like an internal project, and you know how those things go at agencies, but it's like I feel like there's so much archival information sitting there, and I would love to, I just want to make sure that it's out there for people to get their hands on and understand.
I wish you the best of luck with that, because Lullabot was like the OG when it came to marketing and content, and had so many amazing people that have made such impact. So the what's on that podcast is got to be pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You mentioned some amazing things like moving to Sweden and the impact it had on your life. Do you have a favorite Drupal memory or experience?
It has to be Drupalcon Chicago, like that experience of like I remember going into that talk, and like when I say I want to puke, I'm like not kidding. I was in the green room and I was pacing around, and I literally like was sick to my stomach. And Addie Berry, who is former Lullabot, who now runs Drupalize Me, former active Drupal contributor, was in there getting ready for another talk, and she like sat me down and talked me down and talked me out of it. And I went in there and did it, and it was just like, it was like something in that moment, like I just let go of all of the tension. And then when I was in there just like sparring with all of these like Checks and Wyched and Karen Stevenson and all of these people, and it's like, and it was just like fun. It was like so much fun. And I think that really came out. And then to have like Dries, who I had never actually met before, come up to me like days later and ask me to run this thing, it was that whole week was so incredible. And it's like truly one of the highlights of my professional career.
It was also a really great conference.
It was really fun. And it was really special to me. Like it was my first time back in the States since I had moved to Sweden. Chicago is my hometown, so it was really great to be back there. Like there was a lot of stuff going on at the same time, but the conference, yes, was also super fun.
I think it was the first conference that was like entirely self-contained in a
Yeah.
hotel,
Yep.
which just led to, ridiculousness, because, the lobby was a party nonstop,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And they gave away the Drupal pajamas to people because of like this whole thing where because it was the first time the hotel was also the conference center. And like I remember Kieran Law getting up on the bar and announcing that he had just gotten a $3,500 bonus for getting someone hired, and so he opened a bar tab for $3,500 and people could drink for free all night. And it was just like it was a party. It was really fun.
I forget the story, but he ended up not getting that bonus. There was like some sort of It's like the person didn't end up taking the job or like whatever it was, but it was still pretty epic. I
had never heard that. That's great.
I can completely picture. I see him now to this day getting up on that bar and
I
screaming,
know.
"It's on me!" So, favorite and least favorite aspect of Drupal, the software?
I think that Drupal, the software. So I think that one of the outstanding things of Drupal that we kind of a lot of people kind of take for granted is the content modeling tools, like the ability to create content types and fields and interconnect them in different intricate ways, to use the principles of structured content to build a website that's flexible and manageable, and to have a lot of different ways to approach that, is to me the killer feature of Drupal. And I feel like people, focus on so many other things, but like I've been doing a lot of investigation into a lot of other CMSs recently, as part of a project that I'm undergoing. And there is nobody that has anything close to the level of content type creation tools that Drupal does. Now, we can talk about the interface for creating those things, which I think could be improved a lot, but the actual tools and the technology themselves are absolutely incredible. And I feel like that's the core of Drupal right there. Like, it's the most important part, and nobody else can touch us on that.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing aspect. And I agree. I don't think it gets the respect and acknowledgement that it should. It's a really important piece and a big differentiator.
Yeah.
So I want to ask the same question, but make it about the community. What's your favorite and least favorite aspect about the community?
Oh, I didn't get to do my least favorite about the software, though.
Oh, please. I thought it was the interface. So please.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, I think, well, it is the interface in part, but I'll say that I just always wish that Drupal had more definition and vision about what it was and what it wanted to be. Like I feel like we spend a lot of our time trying to be kind of everything for everyone, without like saying, this is what we are going to specialize in expertise and be an expert in. And that comes out in a lot of different ways. And certainly the interface is one, because like one of the things that I've noticed is that, again, as I've been investigating a lot of other tools, is that their interfaces are so much slicker. Like, many of them have embraced fully JavaScript front ends where they can deliver a much more app-like experience for people who are creating things, rather than, to add a field, you've got to do 5 clicks with page floats in between and stuff. And that experience is mind-blowingly better than ours is. And I know that there have been efforts to try and do that in Drupal's admin before, and they've always gotten tied up in like, well, do we want to force developers to install Node.js in order to do this and stuff like that? And it's like, that, and I'm sure we'll get into this in the community side, but making decisions like that and prioritizing who we are and what we really want to be to people is something that I wish we spent a lot more time thinking about. And it's hard because when I talk about we're talking about 30,000 people, which is a different problem, but yeah.
And a good segue to your favorite part about the community.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite part about the community is the people, obviously. I mean, I am not best friends with everybody in the community, but I have met some absolutely amazing, inspiring, incredible human beings as a part of this project. And they will many of them will forever be a part of my heart, even though I think at this point, a lot of us, especially from the early to middle waves of Drupal, are starting to kind of scatter, but I really love each and one of those people very dearly. But then my least favorite part is definitely like, I I personally, and I know a lot of people won't agree with this, but I personally feel like you create better products with stronger leadership and I'm not going to say singular vision, but like when I was working on Pinball, there was this adage, and it's like every game has to have a dad, and that's the person for whom somebody at some point says, I'm making a decision, this is it, and we're going to go. And it's like a film director is kind of the same idea. Like, this person doesn't make every decision, but for when decisions need to be made, the buck stops here and we're done. And Drupal doesn't work like that. And I think there are in some ways benefits to that, but I think there are a lot of ways in which it's not beneficial, because it's very, very hard to institute needed change in Drupal if it's not something that the community is particularly interested in doing. Because, for a long time, scratch your own itch, code is gold has been our mantra. And if the itch that people in the community are scratching are not necessarily the itch that Drupal needs to move forward in the competitive landscape, in, whatever other aspects there may be to measure Drupal, then things become difficult. And I think there's always been a push and pull between Drupal as a product for developers, which makes sense because the community is developers, and Drupal as a product for the people who use Drupal, which of course also makes sense because people have to use Drupal and they want it to be usable. And neither of those has ever won out particularly. And I think that as a result, both have been somewhat washed down. And so, this is my personal preference. There are many, many, many people in the community who would adamantly disagree with me, but I just wish we had more ability to make decisions and execute on them.
Gosh, if only the people who use Drupal did more to Drupal. No, I that's one of my biggest frustrations. And I think you said it really well. I don't know what the balance is. We're working on some core changes right now with an organization. Google's funded some performance improvements in Drupal. And I mean, patience doesn't begin to underscore what you need to get through the core contribution process, no matter who you are, and there's so much input and back and forth from people. And like you said, on one hand, it's great. People really think things through and contribute ideas from different perspectives. On the other hand, it seems to go on forever and ever and ever. And, it's hard to make progress. And, if this was a company, we would operate very differently. We would take risks, there'd be decision makers. And, I don't know how we move more towards that without destroying, what makes Drupal great. And I would never want to do that. But I feel like, that balance needs to be improved.
Yeah. And it's hard because, because Dries can say, this is what we're going to work on and that's it. But what's he going to do to make it happen? Right? It's like he has a small group of developers at Acquia who can do things, but they can't do things unilaterally or on their own. I mean, I guess they could all stop like committing patches for anything other than, whatever thing they want to work on. But it's like the ability for anybody to direct anything is very difficult. And that's something I ran into when I was on CMI too. Like I didn't have the authority to say, this is how it's going to be, and that's it. I actually had many situations in which I tried to do that, and a developer would open up a new issue doing a separate approach to a problem. And what was I going to do about it? Like now people are discussing this other approach when I've already said, hey, here's how we're going to do things. And this person was just like, screw you, I'm going to go and try and get this other issue and patch in. And, those are definitely, when I look back at my time on the initiatives, like those things around like leadership and decision-making were definitely the hardest part for me.
In my mind, and that was hopefully the goal of initiative owners, was for Dries to federate out, ownership of critical, much needed changes to the platform to keep people in the community, to oversee, manage, and get these things done, and be that arbiter, right? To be that dad or the one who has to make those tough decisions. And I certainly don't have insight and perspective into all of the core initiatives, but of the initiative owners that I've talked to, it sounds very much along the lines of the experience that you had. And I'd love to see that happen. That might be a sort of a happy medium. You foster collaboration, ultimately make decisions, you move things forward. Ultimately, I think Drupal would be more successful even if there are missteps, because change is better than waiting a year and a half.
Right.
And it's software. We can undo things.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
So more than anything, we've touched on a lot of things now, so we may have already covered it. But is there something that you think Drupal is really missing? Something that Drupal really needs for it to be around for another, 10 plus years?
It's really hard to say. Like, I don't think there's any threat to Drupal not being around for the next 10 plus years. I think the question is, what will it be in 10 plus years? Eaton makes a joke where he says the future of Drupal is to become the open source equivalent of SharePoint. And I've always thought of that as like, Drupal is the technology you use because it's there and it's available and you can, and nobody really loves it, but it's fine and it gets the job done. And so we'll install it and we can build an intranet, or we can do, a personal site or whatever. Although, well, I don't think anybody is installing Drupal outside of Drupal developers for personal sites these days, but you know what I mean? It's like the thing that's there that people use that nobody really loves and everybody just kind of tolerates. And I think that is, and so we can be around in 10 years and be that. I think the question is that what we want to be? And I don't know. And I don't know how to turn that around either, because it's like, there's people's attitudes about Drupal are very entrenched. And, we can say what we want to about Stack Overflow polls and stuff like that. But like, I meet lots of people who, when I mention Drupal, they cringe and they can't deal. And nobody, and, PHP is on the downtrend as far as technologies go right now. And, I don't know if there's any one thing that Drupal needs now to not just be around in the next 20 years, which I'm sure it will in some level, but to be around and relevant in 20 years. Like, there's a lot there. Too much to unpack on one podcast, I think.
I'm going to rephrase that question for a future interview because you nailed it. It's it will be around in 20 years, but
yeah,
maybe as a legacy platform, but how is it around and relevant? That's the real question that I should be asking. And for whatever reason, PHP powers the internet. It's still used by the majority of websites, and yet it's sort of like a dirty word nowadays. And a really my best friend is a college professor of computer science. Like, I asked some of the students about PHP and it was like, okay, grandpa.
Yeah, right, exactly. Even some of my coworkers are like that.
Yeah. So Drupal, itself has perception challenges and the issues you talked about, but the stack isn't helping, et cetera. And I'm hopeful that it will continue to be successful and thrive, but it definitely has a lot of challenges to overcome to continue to be the success that it has been to date.
Yeah, I agree.
Greg, this has been amazing. It's been so much catching up. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you to pass the torch. You mentioned some amazing people. If you had to pick one person, and I know that's really tough, who should I interview next?
I was actually thinking about this, and I think that somebody that would be really interesting to interview is Karen Stevenson. she was around very early in the Drupal days, but she also oversaw and was a very big part of developing a lot of the foundational things that are in Drupal right now, particularly CCK, which became fields and core, which became all of our tools for building content types, as well as maintaining the date and calendar modules for Drupal. And it's like, those are three of the most ever used technologies in all of Drupal history. And she was like right there at the helm of all of it. And I bet her insights about Drupal and the way the community has grown and, you know, building extremely highly used contributed modules and then getting them into core would be really fascinating.
That's an awesome recommendation. I'll definitely reach out to Karen. I love her. She's amazing. And
yeah,
like, her contributions are awesome. And that would be a really great process to talk about. It's not something that we've covered. And that's a really great, was talking about that again this morning with someone. Well, it started as a contrib module and, you know, get buy-in and support and get it into core. And, you know, I think that's a really common path for things. Although the reverse is becoming true these days. Things are moving out of core.
Small core is back.
Dude, thank you so much. I really appreciate you're taking the time to do this. I know you're crazy busy. To all our viewers, we really appreciate you joining as well. If you like this talk, please remember to upvote, subscribe, share it with all your friends. You can check out all our interviews in this series at tag1.com/20 or 20. As well as our past team talks on the latest technology. You can check out at tag1.com/talks. We'd love your feedback and input, topic suggestions, people we should interview. Always love it when you guys reach out. Please email us at talks@tag1.com. That's TAG1.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care.